Hey guys, this is John, and welcome to another Climbing the Rating Ladder video. I'm playing Rubber Duck 11 in this game. Let's open with E4. This is a 10-minute unrated game. So my opponent was just looking for an unrated challenge, and I was thinking about playing with an increment, but 10-minute will be perfect. Okay, so we have a Petrov defense, knight f6 on move 2. I usually take on e5. You can also consider d4. That's a move that gets played sometimes, even at the highest level. I don't really know much about it. Knight c3 is another option. But let's go ahead and take the pawn, and we'll see if we get a conventional Petrov, or here we have it, folks, the Stafford Gambit. Shout out to Eric Rosen. All right, so my opinion about this opening is that, yes, white should take the knight on c6 and then look to defend the pawn, d3 or knight c3. There's a lot of theory there, as has been developed over the past few years since Eric has popularized this line. That is 100% the best way to play according to the engine. However, I generally do not like to play on people's pet territory in the opening if I can avoid it. So I came up with this d4 move a while back, and I think it's pretty effective. I can't say this was a novelty by me by any means, but I started looking into it. It just seems like a good idea. So yeah, we get a trade on e5. Black plays knight takes e4. This is one of the better lines. Yeah, and here you can play bishop c4 or queen d5. I'm going to go bishop c4 because I think it's a little more fun. And you might notice I'm already lining up against f7. Queen d5 is a pretty big threat. It would be an excellent move if I could get this in, double attacking f7 and e4. Black might be able to mitigate the damage by playing knight g5 at that point. You could imagine takes, queen takes f7. They would have king d8 at that point, but chances are if black's going to allow that, it's not going in their direction. Now, I remember looking at this and thinking, well, what happens if black plays knight takes f2, looking for king takes f2, queen h4 check, forking the king and the bishop. But I believe I can respond with queen f3 after knight takes f2 and threaten on f7. So that is one option. Also, if black were to play bishop c5, I think queen d5 is good, or bishop takes f7. We'll look at some of those lines in the postmortem. All right, so black plays d6. So this does invite me to play the move I was thinking of playing, queen d5, or bishop takes f7 first and then queen d5. Those are my top moves here. Queen f3 is another thing I can consider, but I like that less because black plays d5. So let's narrow it down to queen d5 or bishop takes f7. I always feel like I have to talk really quickly in these 10-minute games in particular, so forgive me if I'm stumbling over my words. So this one normally would be the move you'd like to play because we're not sacrificing our bishop yet, and we're looking to inflict some heavy damage. But I do have to consider bishop e6, queen takes e4, and then the move d5. And I see I can go up a pawn there if I take, or if I throw in a check on b5, black plays c6. But I'm not so keen on that. I think I'd rather play queen d5, bishop e6, queen takes b7, actually. Because then if bishop takes c4, I can play queen c6 check, which hits the bishop and the knight. If queen d7, queen takes a8. So I am looking at this option. There's also even bishop b5 at that point, I'm noticing, along with queen takes b7. This is going to be one of these spoiled for choice moments. I don't think I'm outright winning yet, as in winning a piece or something. I think I can win probably a couple pawns here. So sometimes these are hard to narrow down in terms of which one is the best. But queen d5, bishop e6, bishop b5 check. That would solve the issue if black played, let's say, king e7, because I could play queen takes e4 and I wouldn't get forked. So queen d5, bishop e6, bishop b5 check. I think c6 is forced at that point. And then bishop takes c6 check, b takes c6, queen takes c6. And yeah, I mean, honestly, I just really like the look of that. I could imagine maybe black wins the pawn back. Now, before I go too far down that rabbit hole, the other option is taking here and queen d5. That's also pretty darn good. Just kind of leads to an open position. Bishop e6, queen takes e4, maybe take e5. I think I'm going to go with the queen d5 move, guys. Yeah, I like the look of this best. And after bishop e6, tentatively planning on bishop b5. Queen takes b7 I think is still decent, but there's moves like knight c5 against that idea. Queen c6, bishop d7 maybe. So I think I'm probably going to go in the direction of bishop b5, c6, bishop takes c6, pawn takes c6, queen takes c6. Let's say bishop d7 at that point, queen takes e4. I do see that black has, I know I'm getting very far down the rabbit hole here, but queen a5 check at that point. If you can visualize that, good job. And if I were to block, queen takes e5, and that may keep the damage for black to a pawn, because I think I am going to have to trade queens there or allow a queen trade. I can't play queen takes a8 because I'm pinned. So again, if you can follow all that, very good. But let's let black stew. I thought for 2.5 minutes on that move. That's obviously a lot in a 10-minute game. 25% of your time. But this seems like a critical moment to me. So black does play bishop e6. I don't think there are too many other moves, like knight g5 was the only other consideration. So let me just take one other brief look at this. Yeah, I like that move, except for the knight c5 reply. I feel like I can just do a little bit better. So yeah, I'm going to go bishop check. And expecting c6 here. Because on any other move, yeah, now we'll take. Any other move, I get to win the knight cleanly. So c6 makes sense. And then here, I would expect bishop d7, maybe king e7. Remember, queen d7 wasn't working because of this. Okay, so now let's take. And assuming black sees queen a5 here, which I think is definitely the best move, I can consider playing king f1 or king d1. It strikes me as a little greedy to do so, but it's a consideration for sure. The idea there would be to remove the king from the e file so that if black plays queen takes e5 or d takes e5, I could actually take the rook on a8. But, I'm pretty happy with my gains so far. I'm going to be up a pretty clear pawn. I think d6 especially is going to remain weak too. So I may not want to risk it having to play with an uncertain king. Yeah, like king f1. I don't know, d5 at that point. Maybe the engine's going to like this. I just don't like destroying my coordination or compromising my coordination just for one other pawn when I'm already, I think, clearly better. So I'm thinking knight c3, and then on queen takes e5, perhaps just castle at that point. Just get castled, or bishop f4 also looks pretty good. Bishop f4, queen takes e4, knight takes e4, then I'm on the d6 pawn. The only thing is there are some opposite color bishop possibilities I may want to avoid. So, yeah, I'm going to play knight c3. Queen takes e5, and again, decide from there. Close call here. I don't necessarily want to initiate the trade because that allows black to connect the e pawn to the f pawn as opposed to having this isolated pawn. So I think here we're looking at bishop f4 or castles. Bishop f4 is a little more direct, but after queen takes e4, knight takes e4, d5, if I play knight d6, that's one of those opposite color bishop scenarios I might like to avoid. So let's go with castles. And now that I'm unpinned, I am threatening the rook. So I would expect black to trade queens. Let's play knight takes. And the plan in the short term is pile up against this pawn. Bishop f4, bring a rook to d1. I think it's going to be a little awkward for black being behind in development. So they could play something like bishop f5. I was looking at rook e1 against that. So instead they played d4. Yeah, let's go knight c3. Back here, attack the pawn. I think rook d1 looks pretty natural now. Let's play it. Just going to speed up a little bit, given the time situation. Expecting rook d8 or maybe castles queenside. Okay, and here I could think about knight b5 or bishop e3. Both moves hitting the pawn on a7. Kind of like, yeah, let's play knight b5. Unless I care about bishop c5 in response. No, I don't think so. Let's play it. Because if black plays a6, I get the check in, and then I could even wheel back and take a6, although my knight might get trapped if I do that. Like king d7, knight takes a6, rook a8. Okay, so black plays that instead. Yeah, bishop e3 might be a good move here. I think it might be wise to throw that in at this point. Yeah, I'm going to do it. I do slightly weaken my structure, but in a way, I kind of like that pawn coming there because it's going to renew the threat of knight takes a7, and I gain this nice protected square on d4, even having the e-pawn engaged. So it's a bit of a defect, but it helps keep the pressure on black, keep things flowing here. By the way, I mentioned this before. I do not like that chess.com with the pre-move. If you're pre-moving a capture, it covers the piece that's otherwise on the board in the actual game, the bishop on e3. Chess.com, I think you should fix that. All right, so bishop b6, but I think I can take on a7 if I want here. I think knight takes a7 is good. Other thing is I could take here and maybe knight c7, take the bishop. I'd like to avoid a rook ending, though. Ah, wait a second. Is there a trap? Knight takes a7, d4. D4. And then if knight c6, they can take on e3. So, okay, I see you. Maybe I play a4 or something. I think a4 would be a handy move. Let's do that. We'll just wait and see one move. Maybe I go a5. This still doesn't help me threaten this in view of the d4 move, I don't think. But let's see what black does. That may change the calculus. Okay, black just castles. Yeah, makes sense. Could play bishop d4 here. That actually strikes me as a nice little move. I think I'm going to do that, blockade. Try to remove the d4 threat once and for all. Now, I actually am threatening knight takes a7. And it's too late for black to change their mind and take on e3. Black might play bishop f5. I think I can go rook d2 against that if I want. Or possibly knight takes a7 again. Yeah, that would be good. So kind of a creeping move here, just getting a little bit up the board on this blockaded square. Hope you're all doing well, by the way. Okay, h6 played, but it seems like black is ignoring this threat. I'm taking a good look around for reasons not to capture, but I don't see it. The only reason not to capture is this could be an opposite color bishop position if black takes on a7. But I'm up 2 pawns and they're connected on the queen side, so I think I'm pretty happy with that. So we get this, and with 2 squares to back out on, bishop versus knight now too, I don't think I should have too much trouble here. Knock on wood. This is a wood desk, so just gave it a firm knock. Maybe I should knock on that chessboard back there. That's also wood. All right, rook b7. Let's wheel the knight back. Notice how I've erected some of these pawns on light squares too. That can be helpful. Rook c8 is going to run into knight d6. So for the next few moves, I'm going to try to improve my position. Maybe f3, king f2, rook d1. I wouldn't mind building more pawns on light squares. Eventually, I can try to attack d5 or start moving the queenside pawns up the board. If black remains eyeing up this knight on b5, then I have to be a little careful about advancing these pawns, but I'm in no rush. Okay, rook d7. Let's double now. I think doubling is a good idea. Also, a5 was a consideration there, but given that I'm low on the clock, I'm going to opt for more coordinating moves and creating more risk-free threats like c4 instead of going for something that's a little looser like a5 where my knight gets undefended. So let's say rook d8 is played. I think I'll probably go f3. Could also play c4. c4 looks, in fact, pretty good there. Maybe I'll even do that. But let's see. Yeah, I think I'm going to start with f3. I don't really see the downside in playing a little more slowly. If I can play the moves quickly, I'm pretty confident in my ability here. Okay, bishop f5. Now is it time for c4? c4, bishop c2. I don't even want to allow that. I'm just going to play rook d2. Let's just defend this pawn. Yeah, and I can think about playing this coming up, or again, just get the king a little bit closer, eventually use the queenside pawns. If I really wanted to torture black, I could move this rook and try to pivot my knight to d4, but at some point I'm going to have to try to win with my minute and 19 seconds. So not exactly looking for, classically perfect long drawn out technique here. I think I'm going to go for c4 now. Now that I've stopped bishop c2, I'm going to play this, try to force a decision on this square. I think knight c3 was also pretty good, but c4, take, I get to trade on d7, and I think they kind of have to trade both rooks, otherwise they're pretty fatally pinned. Okay, they're going to try to defend, but I get the same type of situation by taking here, and I get to keep these pawns together in the process. So connected A and B pawns. Take with the rook. Okay, of course we trade. And I think they're going to take with the rook again because bishop takes runs into knight c3 or knight d7 using the pin. Don't want to pre-move rook takes d5, though. That would be a bad idea. All right, and here, probably b4. Let's advance. And I think my knight can take care of the bishop by itself. So I'm just going to advance on light squares here. Maybe I bring up my king. Let's see where black puts the bishop. I think I can advance. I think black's too slow to get their king over. They're going to have to give up their bishop for the pawns pretty soon. You see how they're getting jammed up here. So yeah, they can only really bring their king over. Even if I lose both pawns, I can just switch back over to the king side now and win the game. What route do I want to take for my knight? Just planning this ahead. Let's play knight d5. Go here. Threaten knight h5. Of course, the fact that I have many pawns remaining is nice. If it was just knight and one pawn versus king and one pawn, it'd still be winning. But I need some sort of pawns here. And the fact that it's 3 versus 3, I would be winning even without the knight, I think. Although it might be close, just because black's king was so far away. So take the pawns. Let's just bring up the king now at long last. He's been hanging out there for quite a while. Bring up the king again. Lots of ways to play it. Could have played king g3 as well. That was perfectly good. Let's wheel this knight this way. If they chase me, I'll just take the long road out here, or possibly over here. Could also, let's say king e7 were played, just give up the knight and go for the f pawn. That would win. Now we're just flanking in. Win the f pawn. And try to beat the clock. Start moving my f pawn up the board. They're kind of stuck with their king there, so might as well. Check. Check. And just watch stalemates. We are playing an Eric Rosen acolyte, I think. So watch those stalemates. And this is a nice checkmate. Okay. Thanks to my opponent for the game. I always welcome comments from opponents. So Rubber Duck, if you happen to see this, I would love to hear what you think about this game. I will message them and let them know that this is a video if they're unaware. And that's the point of this series, guys. This is not, ooh, look at John beat up on lower rated players. No, this is an educational series. I've been doing this for years. I want you guys to get better. And it helps me too. It helps me clarify my thought process when I have to speak something that has otherwise just been, roaming around in my head, possibly for years in chess. When I have to actually speak a concept into existence that I've only thought about on the context of the chessboard, it really helps me too. So, all right, we're going to check a few things. I'll go over some lines with this d4 option against the Stafford. Again, I would highly recommend this. It leads to a better position for white. I can't say it's absolutely better than knight takes c6. I think knight takes c6 is just clearly the best move here, taking black up on the gambit. But you got to be ready for stuff. And again, think about the territory upon which your opponents are wanting to play. Like, I'm very big on that, hence why I play the Scandinavian and why I think it's a very good opening for people at amateur level, especially. If the opponent has a lot more experience with this, knight takes c6, d takes c6, and you might have watched Daniel Naroditsky's refutation video 6 months ago, but they play this every other game that they have as black. Who are you going to bet on? When push comes to shove, you either better have a really good memory or you're really confident about your ability to solve problems at the board. But this can get miserable if you're unprepared or you mess up a move order. So we won't talk about that. There's lots of resources for the accepted variation. But I like this d4 move. I think it makes a lot of sense. There are traps here, which I will show you, where you can actually trap black. And in the worst case scenario, I think black wins the pawn back, but white still has an advantage here. And you saw very quickly that I was actually able to win material from this position. So yeah, as played, I think maybe this sequence, bishop e6 and rook d8, was not the best. And I definitely think around here, bishop b6 should not be played by black. Probably black has to bite the bullet and trade bishops. And then, I don't know, maybe rook d7, something like this. This is miserable. This is probably a technically winning position for white with the extra pawn and the nice pivot square. But I would have to do a lot more work compared to the game because black does still have the a pawn on the board. And, I do have this semi-weakness on e3. So I imagine that computer's not actually going to like what I did here with bishop e3. I'm also going to be curious what it says about this moment. Again, I spent 2.5 minutes on this move, 25% of my time in this 10-0 game. It's a lot for sure. I probably shouldn't spend that much time, but I was considering variations that are similar but subtly different, trying to win a pawn or two. So I'll be curious what the engine thinks about this, whether I should take on b7 or do what I did in the game, or does the engine even like bishop takes f7, which again is pretty tempting. Take on f7, get this fork. That's a common forking idea, and then go from there. I thought maybe black takes on e5. They could try to get some sort of development edge. I'm just kind of throwing out moves here, but something like this where I think white is for sure better. I'm still up a pawn, but in the short term, black's development is kind of nice. So we'll see what the computer has to say about that. Yeah, later, I think it's just tough for black once I get knight takes a7 in, or arguably even once I have bishop d4 in, which I maybe should have played on the previous move. I was feeling very, very good. And I think after knight takes a7, black should probably capture and try to defend this position down 2 pawns, but with an opposite color bishop situation. Let's say maybe bishop f5, and if c3, perhaps bishop c2 could be played. So something like rook d2, rook c8. I don't know. If it boils down to this, again, I still like white's chances to win. But actually here, as I just played out these moves real quick, I blundered bishop takes a4, where if rook takes a4, I would actually lose to the back rank rook c1. So opposite color bishops are often talked about in very drawish terms. Given how bleak black's position is otherwise, even though they're down 2 pawns, I think I would have taken my chances with that for lack of better options. Okay, let's click into the game review. Take a look here. So I got a 90.4 accuracy to 82.1 for my opponent. So Petrov defense. Nowadays, when I play the white side of the Petrov defense online, it seems like a 50-50 split. People playing D6 or knight C6, even at my level, because the Stafford Gambit is just so popular these days, knight C6. And the engine gives it, the automated analysis gives it a question mark. But we know this stuff is tricky if you get into this. So I'll say it again. Check out other people's videos. Daniel Narditsky, I know, has a great video on his recommended line within this. Let me turn off the feedback here. But yeah, I've always liked this D4 move. I think this is just kind of a smart move to take black out of their comfort zone and still have some traps that we can deploy against black. Kind of reversal of roles. So a few different options here. Importantly, wow, that was a voice crack. Sorry, guys. Do not timestamp that moment. I will not cut that out. I'm going to blame that on my muscle tension dysphonia. Importantly, if black takes on e4 here, queen e2 is already looking kind of bleak for black because this lines up with the king, hits the knight and lines up with the king. If knight f6, we get knight takes c6 with the discovery here, winning the queen. That's reminiscent of knight takes e4 on move 3, actually, if you're familiar with that. Really famous idea. Knight takes e4, queen e2. I think if you're an e4 player, at some point you win a lot of games like this early in your chess career. So that's the issue with knight takes e4, queen e2, is that it does allow this alignment. Queen h4, I guess, could be played. I mean, I'm very skeptical of this. Probably some scenario, best case scenario for black is piling up against this pin knight and trying to win the material back. But it looks suspicious for sure. So that's one nice option. Knight takes e4, queen e2. Also, if they play d6, well, here you can take on c6. This is an improved version of the Stafford, right? The Stafford mainline, because black is not taking with the d-pawn. And it's almost like they're playing a Steinitz defense in the Re-Lopez or something. I think here white's just up a pawn without really much to show for black. So that's another option. Queen e7, I know the computer says queen e7. I honestly have not seen that hardly ever. Maybe once when I played this d4 move has someone played queen e7. I think I would probably play... Yeah, I think knight f3 is what I did in the one game that I had this. Because you don't mind queen takes e4. You can play bishop e2 and then quickly castle and put a rook on e1. That's often a signal as if they have their queen and their king lined up like that early. If you can castle and put a rook there, take advantage of that alignment. That's generally pretty desirable. So I think that's nice for white. You're likely to win at minimum a lot of time against that black queen. So queen e7... I guess knight c3 can also be played. I vaguely remember looking at this. Some variation where you try to win some tempi against their queen. Kind of interesting. Looks a little more risky. Queen e7, knight f3, though. This is more reminiscent of, I'd say, a conventional Petrov. Let's say they even take with the knight. Same thing. Bishop e2 followed by castling. And yeah, black's kind of stabilized things, but I think no doubt white's a little bit better here because this is awkward. The queen and the king lined up like that. It hinders kingside development. It hinders black getting their king to safety on that wing. So I would not at all mind playing this from the white side. You can, again, bring a rook to e1. You can think about c4, knight c3, beginning to loosen this d5/e4 situation that black has in the center. I feel like there's some other lines I wanted to cover here, but yeah, knight takes e4 or knight takes e5 are usually played. Oh yeah, just one thing with knight takes e4. I mentioned queen e2. If black plays d5, here you outright win a piece by playing knight takes c6, b takes c6, and then f3. This happens in a lot of games too. And you need to do it in this order. Knight takes c6, b takes c6, and then f3. with the pin. If black throws in queen h4, it's no problem to play g3. Remember, they're pinned, so knight takes g3 is illegal. And then we're going to take the knight next move. If you play f3 too soon, and I've seen a lot of people make this mistake, including some of my students who I've taught this line to, black can play knight takes d4. Knight takes d4, hitting the queen. And as you can see, the eval flips in black's favor. So pause if this happens. If you see a favorable situation for queen e2 with this knight alignment, just make sure you get the move order right if they're anchoring the knight here. Likewise, you wouldn't want to play knight takes c6 first. After d takes c6, queen e2. At minimum, black can play queen e7 and break the pin and get ready to move the knight back if needed. I wonder if they can also take here. Oh, no, then f3 actually works. So, yeah, scratch that. But queen e7 breaks the pin in time because there's no knight on e5, so we're not threatening queen takes e4 in this position. All right, so getting to the game continuation, knight takes e5. Seems like my opponent was actually kind of familiar with d4 because they did play this pretty fast. D takes e5, knight takes e4. Yeah, and in this position, I mentioned a few possibilities. Queen d5, bishop c4, queen e2. I have a vague recollection of this move too. Looks kind of awkward for white, but it does attack the knight. Idea if d5, we play anarchy chess's favorite move, e takes d6 en passant, and the knight is undefended, nor can black play knight takes d6, because that would be illegal. So queen e2, kind of a quirky move. How does this work? Knight c5. I'm going to guess the idea here is to try to quickly castle queenside. This is worth remembering. I'm going to try to play this next time I get this variation, because this looks attractive. Black's kind of cramped here. The d5 square is open. We can go f4, maybe jumpstart some sort of play on the king side or in the center. So you can see we're not trying to absolutely maximize in computer-approved terms our advantage against this Stafford Gambit. We're just trying to get a comfortable position that puts black in an uncomfortable situation, really, where they don't get to play their fun attacking lines, gambiting a pawn or two. So we're saying we're actually happy to give the pawn back, but you got to give us a comfortable situation and possibly a slight lead in development where you have to defend some traps as black. So queen e2 worth remembering there. Yeah, queen d5, I just don't like to play this because I feel like it reveals white's hand kind of early, hitting the knight. Black can play knight c5, but something like this, threatening mate, knight e6. I would definitely not mind playing this from the white side as well. I think there's some potential to castle queenside here too. So that's yet another option. So as played, bishop c4. Yeah, some interesting stuff here. So we saw what happened in the game with queen d5 and the associated bishop takes f7. Remember, knight takes f2. I could totally see a Stafford player playing a move like this, but that runs into not king takes f2, because then queen h4 check, and black's going to win the piece back with an advantage up a pawn, but queen f3. Really nice reply, not only hitting the knight with the queen, but most importantly, threatening checkmate here. And it looks like there might be some funky line where black can perhaps stay afloat. Bishop check and then d5. But yeah, I guess even here, white can go up a piece. Yeah. So I guess even that's not keeping black afloat. So a bit of a trap there. Queen h4. Yeah, I have some recollection of this move too. That creates the square on d8 and does threaten queen takes f2. I remember some weird stuff can happen here. Would have been interesting had this occurred in the game. Queen e2 is the best move. Why is that? What's going to happen on... I think... I'm looking up at the ceiling, Beth Harmon style, as I calculate in my head. I think queen e2, knight takes f2. I believe white can castle there, which is a really funky move. Let's see. Oh, it's bishop takes f7 first. So, yeah, I was thinking castle because the queen is defending here. And we're trying to hit the knight. If the knight were to move, black has to lose the f7 pawn. But apparently this is even stronger. Do this right away and then castle. It's a fun move to play. castle with the pin on the knight. They can defend, but then we play bishop e3, and white is bound to win this knight. And even if material is equal, because we have an equal number of pawns here, 6 each, black's king safety is compromised. So even if black gets kind of cute with queen h4, looks like we have ways to get cute on our own and reply. Even queen f3 here, we can still think about playing that move. Knight g5, attacking and defending. Yeah, there are some funky scenarios I know where... Okay, I guess take here. But I was going to say, white can think about taking on f7, but black does get to fight another day to some degree. Although apparently white's even still a little bit better here. So, some things for you to chew on. These are just points for investigation. This is not at all an exhaustive analysis. But queen e2, queen d5, bishop c4, those are all nice ideas here. I think bishop c4 is probably the trappiest move. And yeah, what should black do? Maybe knight c5 or something is the safest, trying to plug the knight on e6. But I think this leads to a situation somewhat similar to the queen e2 move, maybe even more aggressive for white. Yeah, because if castles, there's bishop h6. You see how rapidly white gets developed here? This doesn't look like a Stafford. This looks like black is the one who has been on their back foot for several moves. So in the game, black played d6. Interesting that is not that bad. I would have thought something like +1, 1.5 maybe, but unless this is a case of the chess.com engine kind of downplaying this move, we'll see. So here's where I spent the 2.5 minutes on queen d5 or bishop takes f7. Yeah. There was a point when I was calculating queen d5 for so long where it was very tempting just to go for bishop f7 and queen d5. So I think I mentioned this in the postmortem. Something along these lines. Just wasn't sure because I don't like being so far behind in development for a single pawn. Queen f3. Let's say king g7. Maybe there's better ways to play this. Looks like here the computer doesn't even want me to take on e5. It's preferring knight c3, kind of like the game later. But I don't know. Let's compare that to queen d5 as played. I didn't spend much time even mentioning knight g5 in this position. I might have mentioned it a move or so prior. Because again, it looks kind of wild to do this since it allows bishop takes g5, removing the defender. But again, this may not be that bad for black. Some continuation like this. But most players would be loath to allow this whole operation with the pawn capture. But yeah, black's somewhat in the game here, I would say. Knight c3, apparently not even worse, especially because queen f5 gets a queen trade in. I have no safe squares I can go to with this queen that avoid a queen trade. That's hard, though. You think of how this situation came about. I think with d6, like black dropped the ball a little bit. Unless because they paused for a while. I have a hard time believing black played d6 willingly, allowing queen d5 or bishop f7. But they still have resources here. Knight g5. Yeah, maybe I would have played this move, which opens this up too. Let's just see some natural looking line. Knight e6, again, that's a tough move to play here. What about queen takes d6? Bishop takes g5. Okay, I'm just winning a piece in that case. It's also even queen takes g5. Yeah. Bishop e6 runs into queen takes b7. This is similar to the game where, at minimum, I have queen c6 here with the fork on the king and the bishop. Queen d7 being met by queen takes a8. So, yeah, I just think the trend of this already is in white's favor. I wish, maybe I hadn't spent so much time on this, but it was an important moment. So bishop e6, here too is where I was debating between queen takes b7, bishop b5. I mentioned queen takes e4. Just didn't like it as much here. Although even here we could try to win a pawn. But I guess due to this is fine for black, apparently. I get chased around a lot because I don't have any development going on. All right, so bishop b5 looks like that was a good decision. Yeah, I could also do this, I suppose. Another way of trying to win a pawn. What about this? Yeah, knight c5. That's what I didn't like here. Knight c5. I could even play this move, but take, knight takes, not queen takes because the rook hangs. Take, queen e4. Okay, yeah. Bishop e7, castle, maybe black castles. Kind of just up a pure pawn here too. So probably queen takes b7 was also fine, but this seemed even more clear to me. This bishop b5 move, because I think this sequence is forced. We get the trade here. King e7 looks risky. Messes with their coordination. So this was all expected. Queen a5 check. And here I mentioned king d1 or king f1 were possible if I wanted to be greedy. Looks like the engine doesn't even have those in their top two moves, though. Ooh, yeah. King f1, d5. And then black gets developing moves in. This is the type of thing I was kind of worried about. If I step to e2, then bishop e5. Yeah, I feel like the engine is underrating. Like, this should be more than -4.5. This should be like -7 or something. I feel like the engine is underrating the advantage or the disadvantage still in some cases. I don't really know why. It is the Stockfish 16 Lite version, browser version. I guess I could toggle my settings, but just be aware of that tendency if you're curious. King d1, I think same thing. Just hate destroying my coordination for a single pawn. So I'm going to give myself a pat on the back for that. Good call, John. Didn't get greedy here. Knight c3. So queen takes e5. Kind of forced. Here I castled. Real close call. Bishop f4 was another big consideration. Yeah, and I think if black's going to have optimal defensive chances, they have to play very accurately from this point forward, especially the next about 5 moves, because they're still behind in development. They have the weak pawns. Yeah, d5 looks like it was kind of cooperative. I thought maybe bishop f5 would make sense. I was just going to play probably rook e1 there. But okay, king d7. That's a nice move. Allows for rook e8. What happens if rook e8 here? Ah, knight c5 check. That's a nice move. As if take, this rook comes over, trying to separate black from the defense of the rook here. Even this is an opposite color bishop situation. Apparently I can't win here with the discoveries due to this rook and the back rank. Interesting. I mean, needless to say, very tough situation for black, but I think if they play accurately for the next few moves, they might have some drawing chances. So, yeah, d5 did feel kind of wrong because that pawn instantly became a target. And I know it might be a target here, but bishop f5 looks more natural to me. Yeah, I think I'd rather do something like this. Still very tough, though. White's play is pretty natural here. Even if it got to an opposite color bishop position, white can grind this up the pawn and with the better structure. So d5, knight c3, gain a tempo on the pawn. Also maybe rook e1 on the way. d4 is possible, but I think at minimum this move, maybe knight d5 also comes into consideration. Probably throw rook check in, though, because if bishop e7, this is already looking disastrous for black. 2 different threats here. So bishop e6, I played rook d1. Really battling the clock at this point, too. Rook d8. Okay, rook c8. Yep. That would be a counterattacking move. Looking for rook takes c2 after knight takes d5. But yeah, still lots of options for me. I can try to do this and this or attack this pawn. So rook d8. I went knight b5, hitting this. I was thinking if a6, I can check. Ah, and then importantly, so I mentioned this briefly in the game. King d7, I saw if knight takes a6, my knight rather gets trapped by their rook with their bishop and king helping out because these squares are all covered. But importantly, king d7 blocks their rook on the d file, so I could actually wheel back in this hypothetical case and take the d5 pawn. So that looks good. So they played bishop to c5. Yeah, and this move, it kind of felt a bit wrong, bishop e3, but I don't want to think too long. I like the idea of trading the dark square bishops and playing with knight versus bishop. Looks like this is the engine's preference. Some weird maneuver. And then c4 or a4. Okay, that wasn't on my radar at all. Yeah, I think I'm going to give myself a pass for this one. It might not actually be that bad. Looks like the engine doesn't have it that far behind the other moves. I just wasn't sure that I had to voluntarily take on this isolated pawn, but black didn't take me up on that. I mean, bishop b6, if they were actually setting this trap, then that was tricky because knight takes a7. I mean, maybe given how the game went, maybe they weren't thinking about knight takes a7, but this does appear to run into d4, which hits my bishop, and it cuts my defense of the knight through their bishop. So I thought, okay, knight c6 here, take. Yeah, this just didn't seem like the way to play. Bishop c4, nasty move. So kind of a clever little tactic there. I went a4. Yeah, could also trade and play knight d4. That would be a very technical way to do it too. Blockade their isolated pawn. That would be similar to what I did in the game. Okay, but then I did this, and now I'm definitively threatening this move, which black didn't prevent. So I think they kind of have to take, or, yeah, rook d7, rook a8, something along those lines. It's not pretty, though. Yeah, and then here, I think last chance, try to play down two pawns, but with opposite color bishops. Best black could hope for is some sort of blockade in the endgame here. You know, I can kind of show something that might be like a best case scenario. It's even sort of hard to engineer. But let's just say for some reason I put all my pawns on dark squares out of this. Maybe black can get some sort of blockade going. Let's just say something like this, where the bishop could control the light squares and make it hard for me to break through. I'm saying this in the evals rising, probably because I just hung a rook, but yeah, I mean, if black could somehow hold out on the light squares and prevent me from especially using the queenside majority, then they have some chance here, but I don't have to put those pawns on light squares, and I don't have to allow a blockade. You can see in the game, even with the knight versus the bishop, I put pawns on the light squares and tried to play against this bishop, which is a good principle when you're pushing for a win and your opponent has one bishop remaining, especially of the color that you don't own. Don't try to put your pawns opposite that bishop to keep them safe. Try to actually use your pawns aggressively to take away that bishop's scope. Okay, so yeah, a4 castles, bishop d4, then take. We got to this situation. And final thing I'll say about this, just don't feel rushed on the clock. Yes, I had little time, but totally okay to play these small improving moves. If anything, it's black who has to be desperate here, because if they continue with the status quo in the position of just playing kind of passively and defensively, I can improve my position. I can play c4 when I want. I can creep forward on the queen side when I want. But aside from the actual time pressure in the game, as far as the position goes, I'm not feeling pressured to try to like run this a pawn down the board right away and make a queen. You know, that's how blunders happen. Let's say black had gone here and I rushed b4 or something and blundered this. I'd really be kicking myself. I'd want to take a look around and say, okay, rook a8. They're fronting me with these rooks here. Most importantly, they're threatening this move. Let's just play rook d1. Let's double the rooks. That makes sure that this is not a threat anymore. And again, maybe I play this move. Maybe I send my knight back to c3 to attack d5 at some point. I know on rook c8 I can play knight d6, but, you know, maybe I also play a rook d2 move at some point if knight d6 is not available for whatever reason. Totally fine to do that. Take your time in statically better positions on the board, you know, clock situation notwithstanding. So mainly here, you can see I was trying to figure out the moment to play c4 because that just seemed like a good way to really question this pawn and try to trade some stuff off. But lots of good moves here. A5, B4, G4, all that's being given by the engine. I think black should have taken on C4 here as soon as I played it. And then we're looking at a wholesale trade. They could take with the bishop, but that's something I was definitely willing to allow. Yeah, I guess their king might come over just in time, but I got to imagine this is winning for me, especially when I can support this. Might be a little bit tricky. I am taking on a slight degree of risk in splitting those pawns, but I think this is still going to win for white. So, yeah, maybe in a classical game, I would have played this even more patiently with a king f2 move or, like a b4 type move, start creeping up. G4 as well. Looks good here. But black chose to try to defend d5, and then when I traded everything off, these pawns were still intact, as in right next to each other. Again, notice how I'm advancing the pawns on light squares. At this point, it probably wouldn't matter because my knight is still participating. But when I got one pawn staggered in front of the other forward, it was always on light squares. Notice that. That's just a good principle because let's say I had played b6 here. Well, now I can't go a6. I would have to get my knight involved, like try to get it to c5 or something to try to threaten the bishop or threaten a6. In playing the pawn forward, black has to retreat. And yeah, I got b6 in with b7 on the way, winning their bishop. Guess they could have played this move, but what would be the easiest way to win here? Knight d5 maybe, followed by knight b6. That looks pretty good. Yeah, because if the bishop runs somewhere, my a pawn is going to promote. So, yep, bishop a8, b6, b7. Again, if I play a7, yeah, the pawns are temporarily safe, but black controls the light squares now, and they have a blockade. And actually, the computer starts to think maybe black can draw this. That still seems kind of far-fetched to me, but I actually wouldn't doubt it if they managed to win the b pawn in particular. So look how big of a difference that makes in terms of the eval. Playing a7 here looks safe, but you're not fighting against that bishop. You're giving that bishop exactly the blockade it wants. And lo and behold, black's king is involved just in time, too, to start eliminating those pawns. Yep, and then this was just picking off the pawns, bringing up the king, and promoting and avoiding stalemate. All right, there was a lot to take in that game. Thank you to Rubber Duck 11 for this game. This was a lot of fun. I'm really glad we got a Stafford Gambit in. I have talked about this line on my channel before, but I don't know that I have a climbing the rating ladder game in this. So let me know what you guys think about this d4 move or your preferred option against the Stafford. Do you play knight takes c6 and have some line within this? Again, I'm not going to go through the theory here because I only partially know it and there's a lot better resources for it. Do you play knight c3 on move 3 or perhaps d4? What do you guys like to do? So thanks again. Let me know if you guys have any questions as usual. Shout out to the analysis gang if you stuck around for the analysis. Thank you very much. And I'll be back again soon with another video. Bye, guys.